shining on a hill that allows us to see the biblical resonances in how America self-conceptualizes itself. So we'll be looking for that. Anything else floating around there? One more, just one more. Yeah.
I don't know if he's done or not, but it kind of just gives the idea of that quote, like death to the savage.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it really doesn't matter how you phrase it. You're right, totally on the right track. The death of the savage. I think it's just sort of glossed as the vanishing Indian. The vanishing Indian. It's kind of a metaphor or a kind of myth of America, where in order for manifest destiny to progress and advance, the Indian must vanish and recede. So it's a twin myth, a story, a narrative that we tell each other. That manifest destiny means America is coming into its fullness, its right realization, but for that to happen, the original inhabitants of the land must recede. They must become the background of the foreground. So it's kind of twin thematic that we'll be looking at. It's called the vanishing. So you can kind of get a glimpse of the areas that we'll explore together. But I find it really interesting that images alone can convey the meaning and the message. Right? They're symbols of something that we need to unpack and narrativize in order to make sense of it, even though we kind of know. Okay, so a little bit about me. It's a little embarrassing. Okay, so most of my scholarly work is in the area of ancient religion, so early Judaism and early Christianity. I really love that relationship. So I've obviously a little obsessive about that. I've written a few books about that. So I kind of draw on that as we go. Like I have a really strong foundation in ancient religion, and obviously even though that's not pertinent to current events, it kind of is too, because it's the foundation upon which religion is built. So I get to draw on that with you, but at the same time, I always have my eye on that ancient storyline. I also am interested in indigenous religion and contemporary religion, new religious movements. Fascinated by how religion grows, how it originates, how it develops. I've contributed articles to indigenous religious studies. I've edited a Lakota memoir of a holy man just last year. And I also love to theorize about religion. So I dabble eclectically in a lot of areas. Some are ancient, as you've seen. Some are contemporary, as I hope you also have seen. So feel free to ask me anything about religion, and if I don't know it, I'll go find out. And third, and finally, I'm also a filmmaker. So even though I did not study film in school, I've been hired as a writer and as a researcher in topical areas that intersect and overlap with religion in the United States. So I did a documentary on religion in Los Angeles, where we interviewed like 100 different people, over 40 different religious communities, understanding a little bit about what their understanding of Scripture was. I've also researched and written a sort of political documentary about indigenous religion in the United States with an eye on legality and criminality in the system. So even though I don't think we'll be using these films, you're free to watch them. You can get extra credit if you do. That was a joke. That would be really So just to give you an idea of who I am, right? So my interests range, but they all tend to come back home to religion. So I hope that helps you understand who I am. Now I want to know a little bit about you. So if you don't mind, I do this because it's fun for me, and it helps, I think, me understand where you're coming from, but also it helps the class understand itself. So please grab a piece of paper if you have one, or tear up a piece of paper on a piece of paper. And anonymously, I don't need to know your name, please answer my questions, my 2 questions. And when you're done, just fold the piece of paper like a note.
Oh my god, should I? Sorry.
No, you're good.
I usually just take everything on my laptop or phone, so.
You're good.
Do you also have a pen at the bottom? Yeah.
Oh, I thought that's what you were asking about.
Oh, you were like
saying-
everything.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
No, this isn't even my paper. Sure. I'll give you this pen after.
What was your name, by the way?
I'm Matthew.
Matthew? Michael.
Nice to meet you. That's my middle name.
Cool.
All right, so a lot of you are done. When you are done, if you don't mind just sliding them to the center, passing them to the center. If for some reason I don't have it, just give it to me again. All right, so next time, ideally, I will assemble all these, try to make sense out of it. Hopefully, I'll be able to read your handwriting, and I will do some statistics and give you feedback. Well, not feedback, but I'll give you a reflection on the composition of the class. I think it's really interesting, and I won't speculate about the percentages just yet, but. I'm always really curious, so I wish that would rub off on you. that the curiosity about like who you're sitting next to. Like, are you sitting next to an atheist? Or are you sitting next to a Christian? Are you sitting next to a Muslim? Or are you sitting next to a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Jew? So it makes a difference to know that you're in a public setting when we're talking about something as sensitive as religion. So the ideal, this is my ideal desire, is to celebrate the diversity of religion rather than to privilege religion or to privilege non-religion either. And so first ideal theme from a topic like ours is to try to make a distinction between the two concepts of diversity versus pluralism. These are very elementary stuff, so just bear with me. But I often hear sort of an overlapping or a conflation of the two concepts, and so I want to clarify the distinction between them. Diversity is an inherent reality. It's something, like what did I say? Diversity, toleration of the other. We often hear that phrase, religious toleration. And it seems to me a little disturbing that I might have to be forced to tolerate something. I'd rather not have to tolerate anyone. I'd rather appreciate them, or maybe even celebrate their difference from me. So I think that the choice of words in the phrase religious toleration implies that there's intolerance that's possible as well. And in the case of civic law, it's like something that needs to be legislated for, controlled, as if we would, if left to our own devices, we wouldn't tolerate others. So it's a little bit less ideal to me than the ideal of pluralism, which recognizes sort of in advance as a default setting the recognition of difference. And instead of being threatened by difference, it affirms difference as inherent to reality, and so it moves beyond toleration into coexistence in a way that can be considered positive rather than punitive. Like you have to control me to tolerate you. But if I willingly recognize your difference, it's a very different sort of approach to the other. So I think that's fairly straightforward. So let's get into some really interesting stuff. So does everybody know what religion is? What is religion? Maybe someone can help. I've been trying to figure it out. Please. Honed in. No, you're good. You're good. Yes.
I would say like a set of truth claims that kind of, a set of truth claims that contest reality.
Yeah, set of truth claims. I like that too. Set of truth claims that say something about reality?
Like contest for what reality is.
Or represent, or...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. So very similar explanation or description of religion. The important thing for this question is knowing the difference between what's religion and what's not religion. So when do you know that something is not religious or not religion? So for example, please. Yes, good. Okay, so a criterion for determining what religion is, or where religion begins or ends, and where something other than religion begins and ends, is either the presence or the absence of the recognition of a transcendent dimension. That's it. That's it. That's not a definition of religion, but it's an identification of religiosity or religiousness or of religious reality. So here's a more elaborate working definition for us, but I bolded the part that correlates to what we've just identified. So let me read this out so it's straightforward. What is religion? Well, many people disagree on how to define it precisely, and I'm one of them. I don't exactly know every single last qualification I need for it, but it can include things like ritual practices, belief systems, the kind of conversations or discourses that we tell, the myths or the founding narratives of a story, the creeds, the formulaic statements of faith that we might make, all the experiences, all the traditions, all the institutions, the organizations by which we, either as individuals or as communities or groups, align ourselves to that ultimate reality that either consists of being inhabited by gods, plural, or a god, singular, or non-personified as a dimensional reality, some kind of transcendent order of existence that is other than the material world that we experience with our senses. How's that? Okay. I really think it's important to recognize this because in the study of religion, it is often easy to confuse non-religious activity with religion. And it'll become really important when we start talking about things like, is there such a thing as a civil religion? Or is atheism a religion? So in the study of religion, sometimes we like to use functional definitions of religion. Like if something functions like a religion, it can be a religion. So does atheism, for example, function like a religion? And maybe someone's brave enough to tell me how it might. Yeah.
I've heard once that the non-belief in itself is a belief, so it could be considered something.
Yeah, it's a belief system. So if we define religion as a belief system, then automatically any belief system could start functioning like a religion. Well, that's how I understand the world, and I'm an evolved ape, and that explains everything to me, and therefore I have a belief system that sort of foundationally orients me in the world.
I think Robbie George says a lot about atheism as a religion in the sense that it adheres to dogmas and has things that it still considers holy in the sense of religion as well.
Yeah. I mean, atheists like to hang out with each other just as much as religious people do. I mean, I know there's a Sunday meeting of the Center for Inquiry where we can get together and talk about our atheist beliefs together. It's a community. It's a ritual that they practice together for fellowship. They eat together. They don't like God together, and various other identifying markers that could describe them as functionally religious.
That's how their own holy figures, to be fair, like Richard Dawkins.
Dawkins, he's the God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Christ-like figure.
Christ-like figures, yeah. Charismatic prophets
Right.
of atheism.
Exactly.
But if you take a good close look at all of those sort of like descriptors, you notice that one thing missing. There's no transcendent reality there. There's no other dimension to orient yourself to. There's nothing. There's just matter. So it's a peculiarity of religion that it's difficult to define. We kind of know it when we see it, but it's important to get the distinction. Like, I know when I'm looking at religion because there's another reality that someone is orienting themselves to, right? So hopefully this is clear. It can help us navigate the relationship between religion and non-religion and explore the boundaries, right? Because not all religion acts religiously and vice versa. So I want to introduce another concept, if you don't mind, that helps us understand how religion works. So if we know what it is that we're looking for or looking at, I also want to work with you to understand how religion works. So I'll introduce a concept which I think is very effective in that process. I call it sacralization. Sacralization. Pretty straightforward idea. It's a sociological term that can be used to describe the process or the way that religious thought and belief and practice grow. It's as simple as a decision that you make to assign meaning and value to an idea, to a book, to a person, to a tradition, to an event, and it renders the object of your projection as sacred. And the word sacred is an ancient Latin term derived from that means to be set apart from the world. So it's a binary term that is used to distinguish between that which belongs to the gods, at least in its original meaning, to the divine, and that which is of the world, or profane, which only means outside of the realm of the gods. So we have a distinction between that which is sacred and that which is not. And I don't want to say that sacredness is arbitrary, but if you take a look around the religions of the world, you start noticing that most people don't agree on what is considered sacred from one religion to another. You could be sitting next to somebody who has a very strong disagreement about what is sacred. So there's no common consensus on what is sacred. Different people attribute meaning and value to different things. The Bible is sacred to somebody, it's just a doorstop to somebody else. Well, maybe they wouldn't do that, but you get the idea. So it's not arbitrary, it is consciously decided, but it's not universal in nature. So there are very few things I think I could identify as like, yeah, everybody believes that's sacred. That's just not the case. So we need a sociological and analytical term to help us understand that it's a human decision to decide what is sacred, which means theoretically that we can withdraw sacredness or sacralization from an object, a person, or a tradition. So it's a choice you're making to attribute this value to a book. And so it can be extended to things immediately, spontaneously, without any previous attachment of meaning to them. And I'm sure we could come up with some interesting examples. So what happens when we do this? We start saying, this is sacred, that's not. This is really important, that's not. We create a boundary between that which is sacred and that which is not. The boundary is sacred too, because it protects and encloses that which is sacred, which means that if the boundary is threatened, we get really upset. Because we've identified with that which is sacred. We've attributed the meaning to sacredness to something. And when it's violated, or desecrated, or threatened, we feel threatened and violated and desecrated. So it's one reason among many why religion causes conflict and harm to others. When someone imposes their sacredness on another that doesn't agree, because it's sacred to them, we have conflict, because the boundary now has been crossed. So as we move forward, we'll start looking at different sacralized traditions, sacralized ideas, sacralized symbols, but always knowing that it's a decision we make. It's not arbitrary, but it is consciously or unconsciously attributed. So for example, no examples. Unless you have an example. Okay. What is history? These are my two favorite subjects. I'm so nerdy about this. It's terrible. History and religion. We're in the history of religion class. So what is history? I know some of you are history majors. I need a definition. Yeah.
Study of the past.
Excellent. So easy. Study of the past. Yes. So it's not the past. So there's a distinction between history as the past, kind of like a small h history, and history capital H, which is the formal scientific study of the past. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a difference between history and a story. You
Yeah.
have,
Yeah.
citations for one, and the other is just a very nice moral, like something to just stimulate your feelings. But history is something that actually has something that you can say. You have like a line of citations that supports that it did happen.
That's correct. Yeah, that's really good. So there's a distinction between anything that might have happened in the past, or just the past sort of in general, and going about determining what happened in the past, like scientifically and critically speaking. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll be looking at history, capital H. Now, technically, the word history, or historia, is Greek for the word inquiry. It means investigation. It's a question-oriented process. So history begins when you are curious. about the past. What happened? So it's not, and this is so sad when people think of it this way, it's like the bane of my existence. When people think, history is boring. History is a list of facts that you have to memorize. History is something in the past. No, it's something we're doing right now. So all of the sort of cliched glosses that the study or history gets, I'd like to dispel. History is a driving force in our current existence. It's the investigation of the past with an open-ended discovery process. It begins when you have a question. So the question can be anything about the past, and how you go about answering the question is history. So first and foremost, definitionally or etymologically, history is the inquiry into the past. It takes place publicly. It's not like some private thing that you're doing, because typically you would publish the results of your inquiry. It takes place in conversation with other people who may agree or disagree or contest your interpretation. It also takes place in the present moment, which means that all of our current reality is embedded within our historical questions. So we can't escape the present as we look at the past. And ultimately, as you say, it accounts for the past narratively. It tells a story. Now, it's so interesting, history as story. A story about the past. Sometimes you need to use your imagination to tell part of a story. I think that's part of good history. But at the same time, you're trying to tell a persuasive story, a story that other people will be convinced by, persuaded by, that accurately reflects and represents the past, but does so in a way that meets the needs of the present. Yeah. It better be a good story, though. It better be a story that people agree with, because otherwise it'll just be an idiosyncratic interpretation of the past. And I'll just identify a few methodological principles as we move forward. First and foremost is, it's kind of these are mouthfuls, I'm sorry, methodological naturalism. It's the method that historians use to study the past. Naturalism is basically just a philosophical position that brackets, excludes any supernatural phenomena from ever having occurred in the past. It doesn't say that it didn't happen like that. It's a methodological prerequisite. So no gods floating down from the sky, no miracles changing history, no supernatural events interfering with the time-space continuum. Even if those things could be true, we don't do history that way. So it's sensitive because many religions depend on the supernatural claims that are integral and inherent to the tradition. But a historian has to bracket them, has to say, well, I don't really know what happened, but that can't happen. Not in my story. Otherwise, you kind of get laughed out of the history club altogether. So first and foremost, you've got to wrap your mind around explaining things naturally, even if you have supernatural beliefs about the past. That's totally fine. You can do both. Second principle, another mouthful, chronological prioritization. Basically, it just means attending to sources chronologically in sequence. Always look for the earliest source first. So in any reconstruction of the past, we always prioritize the earlier sources and set sources in sequence so that we can identify the development or the growth of a tradition over time. You don't start with the most recent and then work your way down. You try to move from the bottom and you move your way up. You do both diachronically, but nonetheless, you work with the earliest sources as much as possible. It helps a lot. And third, pretty straightforward, you're critical, meaning you're not negative and judgmental, but you're basically just trying to scrutinize, evaluate, and adjudicate your sources. So you're not gullible, you're not naive, you're not taking at face value the sources or what they say, but you're just applying a critical lens to them. Great. All right, this stuff's out of the way, right? Okay. So our theme for this winter is America. And I will set us up just by introducing a few binary terms, or twin themes, maybe, that help us navigate the complexity of our topic together. You probably know all the terms, so I won't belabor defining them too much. But America is a fascinating experiment, ongoing, tenuous, and it represents the culmination, or not culmination, the conflation and confusion and creative interplay of two major historical forces in the modern Western world. One, which we'll be deeply diving into, is the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. America is a product of the Protestant Reformation, absolutely. That is the one half of the equation that allows many to make the claim, the assertion, that America is a Christian nation. Because it was founded by Protestants, Christian Protestants, Protestant Christians. The other, however, the other side of the equation is that America is also the product of the Enlightenment, the age of science, the desire to reach universal truth claims for the good of all humanity, regardless of religiosity. In fact, bracketing religion in many ways to allow for the existence of a purely rational and reasonable experimental society. So Reformation and rationalism, faith and reason. Another set of binary themes which we'll be exploring is the concept of awakening. Now, in American religious history, there have been several so-called awakenings. The Great Awakening in the 1740s, the Second Awakening in the 1800s, and many historians love periodization so much that they're always looking for another. The Third Awakening, a Fourth Awakening. When's it going to happen next? We never know. But awakening is a historical theme that runs throughout American religious history. And I'll be trying to weave that thematically together. At the same time, America is the product of the Enlightenment, where rationalism holds sway. So rather than the metaphor of awakening, we have the metaphor of enlightening, bringing light to darkness. Really interesting. I love historical periodization terms. They tell us so much. Third concept, correlating, overlapping with each of the three, each of the previous two, is the concept of a revival. You've all heard of church revivals, right? The revival movement, the revival movement. The idea that something, what is the opposite of revival? Death, yes. So we start seeing like really interesting thematic metaphors in periods of history. So a revival connotates death, awakening connotates sleep, and reform connotates something that's been corrupted. So we have this sort of theme that runs through all of the ways that we describe the past, and even sometimes the present, contrasting with the sort of corollary of the binary, which is faith, reason, and rationalism. On the other side, faith, awakening, spiritual resurgence. So why is that? What actually is the historical dynamo generating, enervating these themes of reform, revival, awakening? That's an important question for our entire course. Yeah, I don't know, maybe. What explains the overlapping themes of reform, awakening, revival? Why are these such pregnant terms?
There's ignorance of some ideal.
Definitely. What's the ideal?
In this context, religious and Christian.
For sure, yes. In this context, it would be a religious and a Christian ideal.
Change is really what's driving all of this, is the need for some enormous change to happen. And again, that leads even over to the secular side. The
Yeah,
enlightenment.
it does. They have very similar impulses.
America was based on freedom more than other places.
Yeah.
So if you're free to sleep, you're free to wake, you're free to follow silence, you're free to follow so maybe this emphasis on freedom is duality because it's not a single path they have to follow.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, freedom is such a dynamic. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Also, I feel like fear of change, because if the world is constantly changing, we always trying to adapt the changing tradition or traditions to the present reality.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. Like, so both hope for change, like an awakening, a reform, a revival, but also fear at the same time. Yes.
Maybe like revelation. Like
Revelation.
yeah, so like having a new revelation about what I guess in like Protestantism, like they protested against the Catholic Church and
Yes.
what they had to say about what the Bible says, and
Yes.
then people like Martin Luther or other theologians came up and they had a new revelation of what God's word was.
Very
So,
good. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So we're looking at historical forces, and the historical forces that undergird the American experiment. You can't escape from understanding the Reformation.
I think part of it could have been seeking power to prioritize, like the ideals that you want in your specific reinterpretation of the religion or something. Like, for example, like, they might want to prioritize, polygamy or something like that. So they'll say, okay, if we get everyone on board with us, we'll have the power to enact our ideal.
Mhm.
So let's make that happen. And so they finally kind of broke away from that whole communitarian religion, and yeah, maybe that's why there was so much breaking off, in America.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely a desire to bring people together. Yeah.
I think part of it would be deep down anxiety about what happens if you don't, because if you don't adhere to what you believe should be the future, what might happen, what consequences could you face.
Yes. Yes.
So just that's not the main thing, but that's definitely the lowest component.
Yeah, like you said, with fear. Yeah. So there's definitely a sense, especially within the Christian tradition, of the consequences or the conditions of not getting it right. Salvation's at stake. So as we move forward, looking at the past and the past that informs the American experiment and the American present, we'll be looking at the Reformation and the forces that it unleashes into our world, which is first and foremost a separation from Catholicism and the uncertainty and the anxiety that that separation created in Protestantism. So Protestantism is an extension of Christianity, but it's also a schism within Christianity. And we inherited that schism. The idea then of the Protestant Reformation and revival and awakening is the restoration of early Christianity that has been corrupted, contaminated, desecrated, forgotten, lost, dead, destroyed, abandoned, forsaken by Catholics. Okay, not by Catholics, but you know what I mean, right? By Catholicism as a system that was enamored with power and wealth and pomp and circumstance and ritual, paraphernalia, priests, popes, dogmas. So there's a tension in religion between Catholicism and Protestantism, and it plays out in America. But it plays out in such an interesting way because Protestantism is more prone to revivalism and awakening because it has the meaning embedded within it that there's a corruption in the past. We need to correct it. We need to correct it now because if we don't, our salvation is at risk. We need to make America great again. No, seriously. So trace the thread of reform, awakening, revival, all the way from the first inception of reform, all the way until our present moment, just another moment in the pattern of revival and restoration of the past. It used to be really good. What happened? So it's a myth, a kind of mythological orientation to the past. We imagine a pristine, pure moment of revelation that has been corrupted, which explains why things are as shitty as they are right now. Sorry, I shouldn't do that, but there it is. And we long for its restoration, the return of what was once a golden age of beauty and purity. And it's intoxicating to think of it that way, especially if your guy's just been elected. So, who's going to do it for you? Okay, so any other area? These are just overviews. I'm hoping I'm not going to alienate all of you, and like, this room will be half full. Okay, that's okay. All right. So in terms of our topic, it's an interesting area too to explore, like how historians periodize. So our textbook is identifying our area of study as American religious history. That's a really recent phenomenon, actually, in historiography. It used to be that when we did our subject together, we would be doing church history. America was founded by church-going Pilgrims and Puritans, and therefore, if you wanted to know the history of religion in the United States, you needed to do church history. That's no longer a fashionable periodization or even topical arrangement of our area. So there's been a shift in recent years in the scholarly community to move away from privileging and prioritizing church history towards embracing the plurality and, of course, the diversity of the actual landscape of religion in America today, which is not solely relegated to churches and church denominational forms. So it's a much more complicated arena within which to study religion now than used to be assumed, and you can still go get textbooks that privilege and prioritize church history. In fact, most of them do, because it's the dominant narrative of our story, founded by nominal and faithful Christians, and yet as it's exploded and developed, it's no longer as privileged as it used to be. So we look at different religious expressions, obviously different religions, and the sort of running theme is inclusion or inclusivity rather than privileging and exclusivity. It could be said a little while ago that some people don't even have religion, or that the only true religion is Christianity, so why bother with all the others? They're inferior by nature. So it's very difficult to be fair and equanimical about religious coexistence. It's just hard. So it's helpful to have a topical arrangement that doesn't prioritize or privilege one over the others. Not so easy though. Okay, so we're getting closer to getting a handle on our themes and topics. Most people who study church history might be oriented towards being believers themselves, so they're studying the past of their own religious identity, very interested in the denominational differences. Like, so for example, who can tell me, this is so stupid, who can tell me the difference between a Congregationalist, a Baptist, and a Presbyterian. I doubt any one of you. Oh, please, yeah, this is great.
Sabbath, one is Saturday, one is Sunday, I don't know which one.
Seventh-day Adventist. You're clear. It's really, it's an impossible question.
For Baptist is in the name where they believe they emphasize baptism as its importance and how it should be done after a believer is a believer and not when they're born.
Yes, exactly. Believer's baptism. Yeah. Are there any Christians who don't baptize?
Quakers, right?
Quakers?
I think they don't baptize.
Find out.
I know like some Christians they do sprinkling,
They'll sprinkle,
and
yeah.
others do like full immersion.
Yeah, that's true. So it could be the means of baptism.
I was gonna say don't baptize and how they don't do until they're like 13, right? Or something like later in life they don't get baptized until they just
Sometimes, yeah, depending. Yeah.
My question would be, which version of Baptist are you talking about?
And at what time period?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really complicated question. Religious differences between denominational forms of Christianity. And it can be splitting hairs sometimes, trying to determine like what the boundary lines are. And also things change. Denominations change. They decide at one point we're going to do it this way, and then they decide to do something differently in a different time period. So tracking them is very difficult. But it helps to have a framework. So I'll start there. This is the framework we use throughout the course. So it might help. Maybe don't obsess on the numbers or the dates just yet, but you get the idea that we're dividing history into periods. It's an obsession with historians to do periodization. I love it. It's great. Because, well, why would you want to do that? I mean, I'll throw it back at it. Why is it important or just useful to periodize history? Even if it's arbitrary.
If you put it through phases, you're able to pinpoint the changes and the importance of those changes and how it would lead to the next phase, or like how each trajectory just leads to the next phase.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's just a really excellent analytical tool. Like it's like putting something in a frame, and then you can really scrutinize it between the two sides of the frame. So a period is an analytical tool that helps us to control our data. So we know exactly where it begins and where it ends, and it's just easier, for God's sake, to be able to like pinpoint the area that you're trying to focus your energy or attention on, rather than the sprawling mass of time that the past represents. So periodization helps. So notice the post-coloniality of my framework. I'm conforming to the textbook here. So post-colonialism is the theoretical lens through which the past is viewed almost universally in the academy today. Right? We acknowledge that we have a colonial past, a settler colonial past in America specifically, that was not named as such as a negative thing when it was in its heyday, but as a result of historical forces, we've now kind of consensually agreed that we are in a post-colonial period of time. But colonialism represents the framework through which we view the past. America was founded as a set of colonies, extractive colonies, that were able to support and sustain and provide resources for the motherland. Then we declared independence, and then we entered into a modern era where colonialism was seen as something a little embarrassing, and now we've tried to establish a post-colonial present. That's pretty strange. It makes a difference if you may or may not agree on the framework of colonialism or post-colonialism or even pre-colonialism, but as long as you know it. Okay, so notice I don't quite know if we've entered a new era yet. Whether post-colonialism in and of itself is sufficient. And the reason why I say that is I'm a little haunted by the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. I was a grad student at NYU when that happened, so I got to see it with my own eyes. And ever since, scholars of religion have been wondering, have we entered a new era, the post 9/11 era of religion? And one reason they ask that, which we'll be looking at towards the end, is the emergence of new atheism as a response to the attacks and to the response to the threat of religion in the current global landscape. So we mentioned Richard Dawkins a little while ago, the God delusion. I think one day God will write a book called The Dawkins Delusion, but we'll see. And the other book that I put on the screen is by a UCLA graduate, Sam Harris, who on the morning of September 12th decided that he needed to write a book exposing the dark side of religion, which he quite cleverly titled The End of Faith, meaning that, of course, faith could come to an end by destroying other people. So we're in a really interesting era of religion. Religion's in some places it's on the rise, and in many places it's on the retreat. And it is being both encouraged vocally in our media as we speak, and at the same time mocked and derailed by a growing atheist movement. So this produces enormous tension in our society between those who are faithful and adhere to religion and those who think that it is a relic of the past and should be relegated to the past. A huge mistake that human beings once made that we can now change for the better. So tension is in the air. And the student of religion, like myself, is in a really excellent place to navigate that tension, to be able to see both sides, to see the pros and cons of arguments on both sides, and to be able to adjudicate between them. So it's a fascinating era, area, and I'm hoping that to convey a little bit. So I'm running out of time, but I am going to keep going if that's okay with you, because I want to talk about how we're going to study religion. And I know it's early in the morning, so we're going to have to deal with the sleepy vibes. Okay, so bear with me. How to study religion. Well, religion is properly housed within the anthropology department. That's where I'm comfortable at UCLA. I can say, even though I have nothing to do with the anthropology department, I recognize the disciplinary authority that anthropology has as the study of human culture. So anthropology is the study of humanity, broadly speaking, but it really focuses on the elements of culture, and religion is a reflection or a product of culture. It has no ontological status of its own, other than what is attributed to it by religious people. So, as a product of culture, religion can be looked at or analyzed through lenses like class, or gender, or race, or ethnicity, all of which are products of culture as well. Okay? So we're a class-based society, we're a race-based society, we're a gendered society. All of those represent fluid, constructed, malleable reflections of culture. They change all the time. So class differences, gender differences, ethnic and racial constructions, they all represent part of the cultural landscape. you study religion, one of the ways that we have to acknowledge religion is to recognize the religion-secular binary. So we're in a public university, so we study religion as a secular, in a secular way, secular approach. Not in a religious way. I hate that word, religion, because it overlaps with both the study of religion and the practice of religion. How many times, if you were to like tell, maybe experiment with yourself sometime, tell a friend you're taking a religion class, and they'll guaranteed they will ask you, whoa, are you becoming religious? That's why I never tell anybody. Just save yourself the whole process. No, it's actually studying religion. So I don't tell anybody. So it's not the religious study of religion. It's the scientific study of religion. It's the academic study. It's the critical study of religion. It's the secular study of religion. So you have to be willing and able to think critically, secularly, scientifically, methodologically. And that's a little disorienting if you're religious. It's kind of like having two minds. You can have your religious mind, your heart, your faith towards the religious object of love and desire, devotion. At the same time, you have to be able to look at it dispassionately as if you were not a religious person. It's hard to do that. So it's difficult. It's a difficult subject to study if you're religious. It's not impossible. It's totally doable, but it's tricky because you're going to want to blur the boundary. You're going to want to overlap the two. So it's tricky, but you can do it. So it helps to have some sort of analytical, methodological tools to do it. Like you know that you're not supposed to think religiously when we study religion. So we look at religion as data. So it's a kind of like, just give me stuff to think about. Like what people do, what people say, how people act, what they believe, how they think about the world. Everything could be inflected with religion because religion permeates religious people's lives. So it can be a reflection that is palpable or tangible in almost any area of life. We also privilege, as a method, the use of comparison. So there's a silly saying that says, if you only know one language, then you don't really know language. So similarly with religion, if you only know of one religion, you don't understand religion. So if you are religious, I'm good for you. But the idea is that you might know a lot about your religion. You might be deeply embedded within it, but you may not know much about any other religion, which means that you might not have the tools to understand religion with a capital R, right? Because it's a comparative, coexisting, academic approach to all religions, which requires more thinking than just knowing about your religion. So that's the comparative approach, looking at religions side by side. And finally, I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but finally, trying not to impose judgment on religion, whether pro or con, whether for or against. Because as data, as neutral data, we're only really interested in describing, in analyzing, in explaining, not in revealing the truth claims of a religion. So it's not about discovering which one is the true religion as opposed to a false, but rather just explaining all religion in their proper contexts. So I'll close today, because I know this is a lot to take in, but I'll close today on some advice on how not to study religion, okay? So I'm going to jump, because this is fun. So I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but I'm going to give you some ideas how don't do it. Don't do it like this. Okay, so here we go. Okay, how not to theorize religion. Follow the 4 horsemen if you want to do it poorly. Really, I'm serious. So take my advice. Okay, so if you want to screw up your study of religion, here are 3, 4, 5, 8 easy steps that you can take. So, or if you want to do it better, maybe don't do it. Okay? So, if you, sorry, I had fun with this one. This was good. So how not to theorize religion? Only focus on a few religions, the Abrahamic ones. Like pick the Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and ignore all the rest. That's the way to do it if you want to screw it up. So be really exclusive in your catalog, your inventory. Don't look at everything, just look at a few. That's so much easier. Definitely be biased against Islam, because it's the religion we all love to hate now. So just pick a religion and don't like it a lot, right? So then you have like a really excellent way to screw everything up, because you're just biased inherently towards one religion, which skews the way you look at all the other religions as well. So you're not, just don't be fair. That's the way to do it. Make sure that you identify religion as violence, right? It's going to be inherently bad if you do that. So definitely identify religion. Sorry, I'm just definitely make religion a negative, evil force in the world, rather than a force for good. So that's a good way to do a bad job theorizing. Make sure you tell everybody what you think about these things. Like, religion is bad. Evangelize, missionize your approach. Make sure that as many people as possible hear you out on this, because it's so important. Make sure that you mock and polemically attack religion, because that's definitely the way to get people's attention. Make fun of them, and you mock and ridicule and attack their beliefs. That's another really good way to do it. Make sure you don't take religion classes, because if you take religion classes, you might learn something, and then you won't be able to be as biased about religion as you were in the past. Definitely don't go to grad school and get a degree in religion. Don't get a PhD, it sucks, there's no jobs, it's just useless. You can do so much better just writing popular books about religion. People will buy them actually and read them. So finally, make sure that religion is absolutely meaningless in the world, that anything religious can be explained by non-religious factors. So when people believe in religion, it's because they're superstitious, or they're childish, they're pathological, they're neurotic, they're needy. There's another way to explain why people are religious. So these are all really excellent ways to do a shitty job of studying religion in the 21st century. If you want to do religion badly, this is the way to go. We have excellent models. I can recommend some books, but this is not the approach we'll take in this class. All right. Yeah. Richard Dawkins on the left, Sam Harris, my friend, right here. The late and great Christopher Hitchens next, and then Daniel Dennett as the fourth. Yeah, all really excellent writers, good scientists, and very fun to read and to work with. So I say that with all due respect to their achievements, but they do not theorize religion well. Right? So we're going to try to avoid some of the mistakes that they've made in the past, and hopefully they do not find out that I just said that. Okay, this was really fun. Thank you so much.